Now I really want to get stuck into crafting here to see what we can do. I believe the first thing we can make, look at that. Oh, I can't stack those. Look at that. We've just crafted our very first thing ever. It's a crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. The crafting bench. The crafting bench. The crafting table. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. A crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting table. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. The crafting bench. The crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting bench. Crafting table. Crafting table. Workbench. It's a workbench. Will I ever get this right? Hello and welcome to episode 50 of Minecraft The Journey. What an amazing milestone it is to get 50 episodes under our belt. And speaking of milestones, this channel recently passed the 500 subscriber mark and I'm over the moon. To all of you who are new, hello, welcome, enjoy yourselves. This series is a Minecraft Let's Play where I've been upgrading a survival Minecraft world from the earliest versions possible, and I'll keep upgrading it until we eventually catch up with the modern day release. And we'll be exploring the game's development and all of its features as we upgrade along the way. I see this series as a combination of both entertainment and education, because in this series we have fun playing the game, but we also take the time to learn about its history and evolution along the way. If you've been watching since the start and you know about Minecraft's early history, then you'll know that in the first few episodes I overlooked so much of Minecraft's early history. And this is because I only had a limited set of versions to play with at the time, and focused my research and episodes really just around the content from those versions and not too much more. But this doesn't tell a full story of the history of early Minecraft, and there's so much more to tell. So for episode 50, I wanted to go back and look at some of the other versions that I didn't have access to at the time I originally recorded, and explore some of the other features I missed and more of the game's history from its early development. Also, when researching and recording and editing this episode, it became very clear that I had missed so much that I've decided to break up episode 50 into 3 episodes. That's right, 3 episodes! I hope you'll enjoy them, and after this we'll get back to our normal, scheduled programming, I promise. But if we're going to wind back the clock, I think we're going to have to wind back the intro as well. That's right, I've changed up the intro. You know, there's just so much content in Minecraft over its 10-year history now, or even more than that, that I thought it might be fun and interesting to just change up that intro every now and then, feature a few different clips, and keep it nice and fresh. So I hope you enjoyed that. You'll be seeing that intro for a little while now. But for now, let's just get right into it. First, we're going to go all the way back right to the very beginning. Now to start things off, we have come almost back to the very beginning. That's right, we're in Ruby Dung 160052, which is May 15th, 2009 is when this version was released. And in the first episode, we went through these versions, and I covered the fact that the plank texture had changed, but I didn't actually cover all of the different textures of the plank, so it turns out. This version includes this variant of the plank, if I can get these controls to work properly. And as you can see, this version is actually quite red when you compare it to what you expect the oak plank to look like in more modern versions at least. So I'm going to show on screen now the 3 different plank textures from around this era of the game. First is the one from this version, RD 160052, which you can see has a pinkish reddish hue to it. And then in 0.0.9a, the plank texture changed again, and then again in 0.014a, it changed to what became, I think, its permanent version for a very, very long time. Here I am in Minecraft 0.0.11a. Or am I? There's a bit of controversy surrounding this particular version because although this version is available in the official Minecraft launcher, over time a lot of people have been digging into the jar files and discovering all sorts of things about the versions of Minecraft early and late. And with this particular version, if you look inside of the jar file, you'll find that certain files inside of that file have a date and timestamp that are ahead of the release date for version 0.0.11a. So what that suggests is that this isn't actually 0.0.11a. It might be somewhere between that version and 0.0.12. The suggestion is that this was a development version that existed in between those two versions that's now incorrectly labelled as 0.0.11a. And who knows, 0.0.11a, oh, I'm so tired of saying that already, could be lost for good, just like many of the other versions of Minecraft. Hey Steve. In 0.0.12a, Notch implemented water for the first time. We don't have that version available to us unfortunately, but you can see it from his own video, and you can also see how much more solid the water texture looks. The mechanics of the water at this time were that water would infinitely flow from its source to fill up any gaps. By the time 0.0.13a rolled around, this water texture had changed. There are a few different versions of 0.0.13a floating around, but not a complete set from this period. Here are a few highlights though. In one possibly development version of 0.0.13a, lava lakes would appear on the surface of the world, which can be seen in Notch's video, but this was removed in one of the next versions. In another development version of 0.0.13a, the shape of the world was a long rectangle rather than the square shape. The version we have may be a development version used to test level sizes. The initial world created will be a square shape, but the long world will only be generated if you generate a new world within your existing game. Also, check out the underside of the water here. It's a light blue texture. From 13a onwards, the human mob no longer spawns upon level generation, but they can still be spawned in by pressing the G key. Minecraft 0.0.14a_08. Now when I was doing my early episodes, I skipped this version, and I think the reason for that is that I didn't have access to all of the versions back then. I really was only going by the versions available in the launcher and also using some of the other versions that I had collected along the way. You see, I didn't know about archive groups like the Omni Archive or anything else like that at the time, so I was really only working from my own versions of the game that I had acquired through various means and using only those versions. I didn't even know that all of these other versions existed back then, and I'm glad I do now, and I'm glad that we can come back and re-explore them. We don't just have to leave them back in time all forgotten like this. Now look at version 0.0.14. It's different, right? The trees are different. This is the only version around this time to feature trees that are all identical in their shape. They're all a little bit different heights, but other than that, the tree tops are all identical, and it's kind of a boxy look, right? It's unique to this version. Although version 0.0.14a_3 is not specifically archived, there is some evidence that this version contained a blue fog. There is one screenshot capturing this from the time, and it's been suggested that the fog colour could have been something to do with the sky colour being linked to the fog colour, but none of this is really verified, and the screenshot is all we have to go on. In these early versions, we've been used to seeing version numbers like 0.0.14a, which means that it's the main release version for this particular release, and then underscore something something like underscore 01, 02, 03, etc. They all denote when a small bug fix was applied and then the game was re-released to include that fix. But this version has 8 of them. And the reason that there were 8 is because there were some difficult mouse issues going on, apparently to do with clicking and maybe even to do with sensitivity and other problems like that. And it looks like from the version history that Notch was working on these issues and then putting out releases within half an hour of the last one and times like that, burning the midnight oil in fact just to get them out. And the versions in 0.0.14a were all released over a 2-day period. There's not always a complete picture of what all of the changes are in these early versions, but there was one little note that caught my eye. In this version, apparently, lava is no longer fully bright at all times. So I've come down into this cave, and I didn't really have a chance to experiment with much of the early lava, but just have a look at it. I mean, look at this texture. This is definitely a texture I've not seen nor covered on this channel before. And I guess if you just look at a single block of it, it kind of looks like a pile of sick. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not a fan of this lava texture at all. But on the plus side, you can swim in it. I'm here at World Spawn because a feature was added to this version which allows you to respawn yourself back at spawn. So if we run away over here for a little bit, go up this hill, the respawn point is right there. And if I hit R, I respawn back at the world spawn point. So it's a really convenient way of getting back to the center of your world, I suppose. I guess the spawn point is at the center. I haven't really measured it or anything like that. But you can also press enter to set your spawn. So if I do that, I think that's done. And then if I run back over here and hit the R key again, yeah, I've come back to my original position. So that's pretty cool. Isn't this a gorgeous little lake? I've come down here because I want to check out the gravel texture, because the gravel was added in this version, 0.0.14 that is, but look at the texture. It's completely different. It's like nothing I've really seen before. Never mind that it's flashing because of the way the user interface works in this version, but we can definitely see that it's very more, it's not random, but it's very spotty. It doesn't have a unique block you can't really see where the edges of the block are. It blends in very well. And actually, I think that's a really good job of demonstrating what gravel looks like. But this is the only version where you're going to see the texture like this because it changes in 0.0.15. Apparently this version also introduces a new cobblestone texture, although to be honest with you, I can't really tell the difference. I know that there was a little bit of a change made. Maybe I'll put a couple of images on screen so that you can be the judge for yourself. You can see on the left the old version and then on the right the new version. It's only a small change. This is also a special version of the game because it was this version in which C418, who was responsible for all of the amazing sound and music in this game, had posted a video demonstrating what the game's sounds would have sounded like in this version. And it is something quite different to what we're used to hearing these days in Minecraft. So I'm going to play a little bit of that video for you so you get a general idea of what the sounds would have been like. And I'll put a link to C418's original video in the description box below. Doesn't that sound just amazing? I love the fact that everything sounds so realistic. I love the ambient bird sounds in the background. It just gives it a really nice sense of atmosphere. Incredibly, C418 recorded that footage in silence first, and then went and added all of the audio on manually to the clip later on. That's impressive. During the development of 0.0.14, a conversation between Notch and Stargoat on IRC led to some experimentation with vertex and color offsets by Notch. From those IRC logs, Stargoat asked, "Notch, just a thought. Have you considered blocks having slight differences between the same types? Like a slightly different pattern? Does that make sense?" The conversation went on, and eventually Notch said, yeah, he could try and implement something along those lines into the game. So Notch did, and released a video showing it, but unfortunately never released the version with that feature enabled. Here's Notch's video called Vertex and Color Offsets in Minecraft. What's happening here is that Minecraft is introducing a random offset value wherever a block joins another block, and to slightly vary the color of a block next to its neighboring block. This is an interesting idea because it would make Minecraft less rigid and blocky, but the result is just a warped, wonky environment which probably does more for your own sense of nausea than it does to actually improve the gameplay. version 0.0.15a. And although I haven't come very far in terms of version numbers, this is a very significant version for Minecraft and Minecraft's history. As you can see, the trees have changed in shape a little bit, and if you look closely, the textures of some blocks have changed as well, and we'll go and have a look at those in more detail in a minute. But this version is the first version of the game to feature multiplayer compatibility, and it was the first version released to the public where players could get together and build together on a server. A lot of fixes and changes went into the multiplayer code during this time and over the series of the next few versions as well, so multiplayer was really becoming a crucial component of the game. The last reason that this is an important release is that this version had been missing for an extremely long time. It was only recently uncovered, in April of 2020. This was after I'd already passed these versions in terms of recording this series, so I wasn't even able to cover it back then. But I'm glad to be able to go back and revisit it now and make sure that we can review all of the changes and the history of this version, which makes it a special part of Minecraft. Well, what exactly is going on with these textures? I suppose we can take a closer look. We've got a new leaf texture, a new log texture, a new sand texture, a new gravel texture. Okay, let's have a look at them one by one. I'll put up a comparison. First, oak leaves changed from this to this. Oak logs changed from this to this. The gravel we saw previously changed from that to this, and it now only generates underwater. And sand changed from this to this. A much brighter colour. For the next few versions on from 0.0.15, the changes were mostly to do with multiplayer test, but since this is a single player Let's Play series as well, I didn't cover multiplayer versions or that functionality too much. But these changes included things like fixing multiplayer rendering bugs, adding names above players, and the addition of multiplayer commands. In version 0.0.18a, multiplayer skins were added. Version 0.0.19a added the hotbar and two new blocks, the sponge and the glass. We experimented with the sponge during in-dev, but one of the interesting characteristics of the sponge at this time was that it disappears after a while after being placed. The glass was also interesting because it was semi-transparent and didn't have a border. Unfortunately, because this version is currently lost, we can't see that texture up close, but here's a picture of it that was posted on Notch's blog. In version 0.0.22, sounds were added for the first time. The next version I covered was 0.0.23a, because this was the last available version of Minecraft Classic before moving on to Survival Test, and I was able to cover most of the changes in between. But if I had one regret, when I was recording this series back in the beginning, I wish I had done more research and slowed the upgrade pace down a little so that I could cover more features and more of the history in detail. But hey, it's not like we can't come back and rediscover this stuff now, right? There was an almost 2-month gap between the last multiplayer test release and the first version of Survival Test, mostly because Notch had things going on as well as focusing on getting the survival code ready. He did say there was a lot of work to do. From his blog, Notch posted the first image of player armor, as a layer rendered over the top of the player model. As a fun little aside, Notch also posted this picture on the same day, stating, "I just realized there's room in the player texture for a separate head texture. Rendering that with alpha testing and some offset lets people have hair with volume and glasses and stuff." There were several versions of Survival Test, but only a couple are archived. The first version was 0.24 Survival Test, which first introduced survival mode, the basic mobs, weapons, and combat. The earliest version in this series that we can play is 0.24 Survival Test 03, which we covered way back in episode 1. But what I didn't mention is that this was the first version which included support for 3D anaglyph, designed to give you that 3D experience. This feature was removed in Minecraft 1.13. There was an interesting bug introduced in this version where water source blocks would drop if they were exploded, but unfortunately we can't play with that due to this version being lost. From here I skipped through to version 0.27, but although 0.25_05 Survival Test does exist, I didn't have it at the time of recording. But this was probably okay, because there wasn't too much difference between this and version 0.27. Let's talk about the creeper. In episode 1, I talked about how the creeper mob was a mistake by Notch, who got the height and length mixed up when trying to create a pig, and this model eventually became the creeper. But there's a much deeper story behind the original creeper that I didn't get into or know about. This is the earliest screenshot we have of the original creeper model, after Notch had mixed up the values and before it got its iconic skin. But what exactly is the creeper's skin? Notch had stated on Twitter that, "I imagine them being made out of leaves or similar. I'm not sure why they explode." And sure enough, if you look in the texture files for the first creeper from 0.24 Survival Test 03, you'll see that their skin is exactly as Notch said. There's a sort of yellowish body texture completely overlaid with leaves. And if you line up the actual leaf texture and lay it over the top of this model, you can see it's a perfect match. When asked what the texture of a creeper would feel like, Notch said, "I've imagined them as being crunchy, like dry leaves." I find this intriguing because you'd expect that if a creature were made of crunchy, dry leaves, then it would be very rustly and noisy when moving around, but this isn't what we've come to expect from the creeper when it creeps up on you in modern versions of the game. The creeper we see from 0.24 Survival Test 03 is a much darker colour and lightens up whenever it gives or takes damage, and it will also flash when it's low on health. In 0.27 Survival Test, the creeper's skin was modified to have darker feet and darker textures around its body. You might also notice that it leaves a smouldering effect when it explodes. In a development version of 0.26 Survival Test, spiders were added, and Notch released some pictures and information about them. He said, "New enemy type. The idea is that these will produce web tiles." During Survival Test, the spiders never did produce web tiles, but the game would later introduce cobwebs much later in its development. As you can see from the screenshot, the original spider was added with a brown texture, but after a post by Zion on the TigSource forum, who suggested that the spiders could have red eyes and a darker body texture, Notch changed the texture just before releasing the 0.26 version to the public, giving the spiders their newer, darker texture and signature red eyes, but they wouldn't glow in the dark until in-dev. But there was even more going on around this time that I didn't cover. Like I said, I wish I hadn't rushed it in the beginning. In 0.26_04, Notch was playing around with the slab, or half tiles, at this point in the game's development. Here's a screenshot Notch posted of a dirt slab. Rain was being tested as well, with Notch stating, "Half-sized blocks, all dirt tiles, so it gets kinda slow. And rain! Those rain particles on the ground are dynamic, of course, and bounce around." Well, I hope you enjoyed the first part of this 3-part saga, and you can probably now see how much I missed and why I needed 3 episodes to cover it all. But I'm glad to have been able to go back and revisit all of this, and I've learned a lot more about Minecraft's early development while doing it. I hope you have too. As I mentioned, this special episode is split into 3 parts, so please come back for part 2 and part 3, and we'll be able to dive into all of the rest of the stuff that I missed. So I'll see you in part 2. Until then, this has been bugmancx. You've been watching Minecraft The Journey. Bye bye.